Kate, can I hand over to you now, please?
Yeah, thank you. And as Alex says, thank you for everybody for joining this morning. I think when we had the pre-session talking about this, those of us that have been through LGR, and I laughingly say come out the other side because I don't think there is another side to LGR, it's just quite a long journey, are really keen to make sure that we share our knowledge and experiences with people. So please just ask anything. We will put our details in if people want to pick up conversations later, certainly with myself. I'm more than happy to do that. I think there's a lot of stuff that we can share and hopefully that you can all get a benefit from learning from. So just by way of quick introduction to myself, I'm Kate Home, the Assistant Director for Digital and ICT for Cumberland Council. So Cumberland Council came into being in 2023. One of the new authorities that were in the area that used to be Cumbria. Cumberland is made up of 3 district councils and half of the county council. So I'm responsible for the ICT provision across that area. In Cumbria, we didn't split our ICT service day one. We haven't yet split that service, so I'm responsible for what was the County Council ICT service in its entirety, providing services to both myself in Cumberland, but also to our neighbouring authority, Westmoreland, and to Cumbria Fire and Rescue Service. So I've got experience of both splitting services and merging services through an LGR programme. So that's where my background is. And I also led, was part of the customer and digital work stream pre-day one in terms of how we were going to establish websites, customer solutions for our customers in our new council areas. So that's where my background in LGR is. So if I hand over to some members of the panel to introduce themselves. James, come to you first.
Hi everyone, James Elwood. I'm Head of IT Operations at Dorset Council. My background was with the former County Council in Dorset. LGR for us was back in the dim and distant past of 2019, pre-COVID, a different era entirely. And the context for Dorset was one of creating 2 new unitary councils. So BCP, Bournemouth, Christchurch, Poole Council, and Dorset Council. So there were 9 authorities in the Dorset geography at that point, and in effect 6 of those converged into Dorset Council. So this was it 7? It's 7 of those. So most of the former county council, and then the 6 borough and district councils in that wider geography. Like Kate, we did both aggregation and disaggregation. So the LGR process for Dorset saw clustered districts that had just converged and their technical platforms and their officer structures being split apart again. So we were disaggregating that. So East Dorset and Christchurch, East Dorset came into Dorset Council as part of that. But because the Christchurch area went with Bournemouth and Poole, we disaggregated county council services for the Christchurch area, primarily, I guess, a focus on social care stuff, into the BCP Council. Yeah, that's me.
Rebecca.
Hi, morning everyone. So I'm Rebecca Wilson. I'm a Programme Manager at the Local Government Association. So I look after a sector support programme for digital capabilities and also a brand new programme which is called LG Horizons. The LGA has quite a large portfolio of work to support councils with Devo and LGR. So within that package there's a work stream on DDAT. We've called it DDAT Readiness, and that sits within my team and is headed up by my colleague Lisa Trickey, who very much wanted to be here today but is speaking at a similar event in Scotland of all places today on English devolution. But so we ran, Lisa ran a essentially a sort of 3-month project early this year, looking at the kind of, I guess, the digital data and technology considerations for LGR. Had lots of interviews with maybe some of you, so thank you if you took part in it, but interviews with officers in unitary authorities created since 2019. So that report is available on our website, and quite a few things came out of that I can hopefully draw out today. And building on that research, Lisa now kind of leads full-time on support for councils in this area. So I will do my very best to cover for her today.
Thanks, Rebecca. And Andy.
Hi, I'm Andy Kennell. I'm the Service Director for ICT at Somerset Council. And like Kate, we went live April 23, which seems a long time ago now, but it isn't really. We were a 5-into-1 unitary, creation. A few wrinkles. So there was one of the districts that had outsourced its ICT and other services to a third party. So there was and still is some disaggregation from that. And obviously, as we've progressed over the 2 years, we have started to devolve some of the services to town and parish councils as well. So there's a big tail to post vesting day that hopefully we can share those journeys and those challenges with you all.
Perfect. Thanks, Andy. So the format of today's session, we've got some prepared questions that we're going to talk to and discuss as a panel. As Alex said, though, we want you to make sure that you get the most out of this session. So if you've got questions, please put your hands up, put them in the chat, and we'll monitor those as we go, because I want this to be as conversational as possible. So, we're in a safe space. Share your views, ask your questions. There's no stupid question. There's been we've got across our panel a variety of experiences of LGR. So please just make sure that you get the most out of us today. So without further ado, I'm going to start with our first question. So I'm going to come to you first, James. How do you begin to understand your starting position for LGR?
Three things, I guess, struck me about this one. Hopefully they're not too blindingly obvious. I mean, the first thing for our journey in Dorset was understanding what that journey looks like for vesting day. So understanding that the clarity around what your vision is for day one, and then extrapolating from that what that means for technology and data services. So for Dorset, maybe with hindsight, it feels like it was relatively modest. We were looking at safe and legal, a phrase we've come across probably quite frequently, that understanding that residents weren't having to experience the change. So we looked like we were a single organisation to residents. So we presented through our website and we presented through our email addressing and things like that we were a single organisation, that our democratic processes were converged for day one for the new council, and there was a focus on kind of the sort of compliant, safe, legal operations of the core parts of the organisation by a decision to adopt the county council's SAP platform for finance, HR, payroll, etc. What I think we didn't do was necessarily communicate as well as we could have done what the implications of that vision were to the wider organisation for post vesting day, and so we focused on that in terms of the delivery, but understanding the impacts on officers and colleagues working in operational services beyond that, and some of the frictions that they would experience despite our best efforts. I think we could have spent more time in articulating that. I think the second thing is obviously to do some discovery, and you can't start your discovery soon enough in terms of understanding where you are as discrete organisations moving forward together. So understand and document your people organisation and what they do, understand your contract contexts, understand your budget contexts, obviously understand the technologies that you've got and how they're configured, understand the business solutions you're operating, and some thought to the data assets. And it is critically important to start that early. One of the things that we experienced was an increasing pace of loss of people who were anxious about the process, and they went with key knowledge about services that we were looking to converge. And once they've gone, what it exposed was poor record keeping in lots of the organisations, and I'll put Dorset County Council in that space too. And as a result of that, you're struggling to understand the context of convergence. And the other thing I think, so coming to my third point to this question, it's about how you get the right leadership through that pre-vesting day phase, where there's lots of anxiety for individuals about what the future might mean in terms of job role. There's lots of leaders with different opinions about how things should be done, and how are you managing and brokering peer-to-peer views on how you should get from A to B. And so having strong leadership mandated to move through that pre-vesting day period was something that I think we lacked for. We didn't have as sharper a set of leadership. And as a result of that, we entered vesting day without some of those preparatory discovery information available to us. and it definitely hindered our ability to converge and deal with the tail that Andy described there, in terms of, it's not just getting to day one is investing day. Then there's a significant program of work that follows on from that for us.
Joe, you've got your hand up.
Just that you talk, James, about people leaving with key skills, and you found yourself a little bit lacking in places. If you went through it again, what would you do to try and mitigate people leaving? It's we've got some really critical posts that we're still struggling to fill across 2 councils, and one of the issues I'm going to have is that they're going to be with us about 18 months before we hit the new council. How do I make them stay nicely?
I think that's a really a difficult challenge, and I think a lot of the reason for people choosing to leave was anxiety. In particular, I mean, I don't know whether other colleagues experience the same. For Dorset, the county council was the really significant partner in the process of convergence, and so our LGR process was very strongly influenced by a fear of takeover by the county council, and very strong efforts were taken to distance the process from it being a county council takeover, which of course it wasn't a county council takeover, but where the county council is 80% of the in-scope people, it's difficult for people not to feel like that. So I think one thing that really strikes me is that you've got to tackle that perspective head on, and try and give assurance to people that this is a co-creation of a new organisation in which everybody has a potential future. So we saw some of the senior leaders leaving in Dorset's case from the district and borough councils, through that process.
Yeah, Joe, I just, before I bring Tony in, I think it's a very unsettling process for a lot of people. I know there is a lot of stuff around the narrative that's there. Absolutely the same as James. There was a lot of talk about county takeover. There was lots of talks about winners and losers. The districts had won because it was their bid that was chosen. That I'm not saying that you can necessarily prevent all of that from happening, because that's just human nature, but I think having a real eye on how you communicate the messages around this and how you try and tackle some of that narrative, it is going to be unsettling, and some people will choose to leave. And I will have to hold my hands up at this point, because I was one of the people that chose to leave. I left the county council pre-day one, for a number of reasons in relation to all of this, and took another opportunity, and I've chosen to come back for my sins. But there is some of that is part and parcel. But I think you being aware of it and having, I think, a really honest communication as well. I think sometimes there's a tendency for us all to go, it's all brilliant. It's all brilliant, everyone. Isn't it brilliant? It's a once in a lifetime opportunity to make a real change. And some people don't want to hear that. They just want honesty and transparency. Actually, it is really hard. And just to acknowledge some of those feelings, I think, can go a long way to doing that as well, without going too much down the negativity element, but actually being really honest with people about how hard a journey this is, I think, is something that I have taken as learning from that. Tony, come to you first before I go back to the rest of the panel on this one.
Yeah, thanks, Kate. And it may not necessarily be for answering now, because it may be something that comes across in each of the speakers, but I guess as I listen to the response to Joe's question, the thing I'm struggling to get my head around is what the shadow period looks like. And I guess, having so I've been through a couple of big reorganisations in other bits of the public sector in a dim and distant past, and there was a very distinct governance shadow period with different governance. So I guess there was a bit of a question in terms of what you've just said there, Kate, about who's doing the engagement and who's doing the communication, and is a shadow authority part of that. So that was the question, really.
Yeah, I mean, I've got a view on shadow. I don't know if Andy, Rebecca, you've got anything you want to add?
I think that is one of the challenges, because whilst there is Somerset had a controlling authority, which was the county council, you still have to get decisions through, and there will be different versions of yourself with different views about what is the right and wrong decision and what is the path, and that's kind of one of the points I had the later of how you how you kind of work through that, and that's the kind of thing that maybe when you're thinking about what we're going to be doing in investing day, you haven't thought about that journey and how you're going to take everyone on with you, and the fact that you can't take everyone on with you because not everyone wants to be there, and also that, you know, playing into how do you keep people, you know, that there are, you know, at a certain age, over 55 and less than 60, and if you've got generous package for redundancy, people are more inclined to go, and there isn't anything you can do about it because that's their decision, and they've made that decision to go. So you could quite easily lose those people that have got vital bits of knowledge because that's where they are in their life, and that's kind of just how it happens in this. And you know, that's part of the environment as well that you kind of walk into.
Yeah. James.
I'm going to comment on Tony's observations around shadow authority. I think from my recollections of where Dorset was, we had a shadow authority. One of the district council chief execs was appointed as the kind of shadow chief exec, and he then subsequently became our first chief exec, Matt Prosser. What I would observe, though, of the shadow authorities, it's very narrow. It's at the absolute pinnacle of strategic leadership for the organisation and dealing with government and dealing with preparing for a new council. And it wasn't deep enough to provide shadow authority leadership to some of the agendas that we're dealing with. The agendas we're dealing with were kind of afterthoughts, if you like. They were left to a programme team of peers with some external programme management leadership to support us through that process. And as a result, I don't think we had as strong a sort of shadow leadership to tease through the challenges and differences of opinion about how we do things, and that our way is best. Our way of doing that is the best way of doing it. That's what we should move towards. So to cut through that, and that brought lag. It brought frustration. It brought to some extent conflict, not always in a constructive way, because we were lacking for that leadership. So I think for me, shadow authority, you should look to get some depth to that, not just at that very top level.
Yeah, I would second that, James. I think shadow was one of the more challenging periods of time when that shadow authority was first being formed, that kind of transition into this new world of having a shadow authority with shadow elected members and a chief exec, and just that kind of planning for how you get decisions made in that period where you're not quite the old and you're not quite the new, but you still need things to happen, and that can be quite unsettling because it also becomes a focus, understandably, of people's attention in terms of, you know, senior officers getting into new positions within the new authority and how that's kind of cascading around the organisation. I think being aware of it and doing what you can to mitigate it is the important bit here, and not underestimating just how unsettling that particular period can be, because it is a struggle to get decisions through at the level of, as James says, at the level of detail that some of this needs to be considered at. At least that was in our experience. It was one of the harder periods of time when we were trying to get this stuff done. But going back to the kind of understanding your starting position, Andy, Rebecca, have you got anything you want to add to that?
I think James covered off most of it, but I think that it's more about how you think about that end point. So I think you need to think about what are the challenges going to be on day two, because day one probably fairly quiet. You know, your logo changes on the back of your laptop maybe if you've rolled that out, but there isn't an awful lot of change that happens on day one. But in that lead up to that, you need to start thinking about how am I going to tell who still works here. As we said, there's a lot of people leaving. You'll be getting everyone into a HR payroll system that might not be up to date with what you've got in your IT systems. You may be buying licenses for people that have left or are going to leave, and you know that can become expensive when you're talking about Microsoft licenses. You may not have clarity on your budget. Previously, you may have been using the finance system and you were very adept at understanding where your budget was, and that doesn't exist anymore. So you've got to find out where have all those constituent parts landed in your budget. Have they landed correctly? And do you know what you're paying for? And align that to the contracts, and when are they going to be renewed? And did you have any savings targets in the business case, and how are you going to achieve them? So there's a lot of stuff that, yes, it's that discovery of what have I got, but that's a very moving target when it comes to vesting day. And then suddenly you're in charge of this much bigger organisation with much more people, and doesn't matter whether you come from a county or a district, you'll be learning something new. There will be systems, you know, revs and bends in the district that I wasn't aware of. You know, now I am. And if you're coming from a district, you wouldn't have that interaction with social care. So there's a big learning curve for you as a leader. And also if you're part of that process and you're not planning on staying, kind of think about how are you going to help the people that will still be there, because everyone is needed in that lead up.
Yeah. Thanks, Andy. Nicola.
So Andy, you were talking about kind of that change piece. Just wondering, because I very much work in transformation and change, how did you manage that resistance to change? You're talking about people having to use new systems and new ways of working. Have you got any advice there on keeping people engaged and getting them to actually go through that change curve?
I'm not sure I've got advice. It is that it's that constant communication and letting them know. But you know, when you're consolidating into a new finance system, sometimes there isn't something to look at because you haven't configured it or isn't set up yet, or they'll look at it, but their budgets or their general ledger won't be as they will be. So it's kind of understanding the timing of it and when it's best to engage with them. It's always best to engage early and then explain what the high level, what the plans are, but some of those plans form and going back to that, you know, and it may not be your job. You know, there is a time, I can remember it, there was the only person that had a job was the CEO and everyone else doesn't have a job. And we were coming up to election time. So the members didn't know whether they were going to be elected. So there's this whole, and that's in amongst that shadow authority where you kind of think, I don't really know who I'm working for, whether I've got a job, and what are the long-term strategies for this that I'm aligning to. So it's a very changeable and difficult time. And that's just as a leader. Imagine if you're lower down in the organisation, you're maybe not as privy to some of that information as well. So it's an interesting role as a change and transformation officer. So, you know, and enjoy it. It will be the most interesting time of your life.
Thank you, Andy.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. Emma.
I was going to ask this earlier, but I just was curious, just where you were saying that the chief executive for the shadow got appointed. So was that the only post that got appointed to within the shadow, or was there almost like a sort of a structure, you know, albeit clearly at a high level, but underneath almost like that tier 2 created for any of you?
Tier 2 was sort of round about Christmas time, I think, and then I got appointed the end of February, so I had a month honeymoon before vesting day. So it was fairly late on, because obviously unless you've got the CEO, you're not going to appoint the team below them, and that has to be an outside role. So there wasn't, and Duncan came from outside anyway. So you know, it is a completely new organisation from the top down. And then once you get that role, you've got to work out, what does my department look like, and who and what is my structure. So there is no real safety net for anyone at certain points.
Yeah, I guess I was wondering, in your experiences, could that have been done? So could tier 2, given obviously some your reflections sort of so far, just around obviously, you know, people leaving because there's just uncertainty, could the tier 2 have been appointed earlier, or was it just that's just how it was? Could that have been expedited a bit to sort of give more assurance, but allow, you know, a bit more time prior to vesting day to, you know, get some stability?
I think it could, yeah. I mean, it's. I think did Kate? Did you people appointed earlier in your work? Because I'm sure I've spoken to people in that period where some people had jobs, whereas I didn't. But I might be remembering that wrong.
I think there was a mixture, Andy, and I think we had some people, but then AD colleagues weren't appointed some until the February as well. So there was a real mixture of
yeah.
I mean, I'm struggling to recollect some of it. All these things that you do.
Yeah, we all black it out, don't we?
Block out the memory.
I don't blame you.
So I think because of the nature of some of the formal decision making and some of the formal legislative stuff around shadow, and when you can have elections, and it does become quite challenging in terms of timescales, because as a chief exec, without having your cabinet, you know, and sort of that strategic direction of the authority, and having who do you have the conversation with in terms of what you want your structure to look like below that.
Yeah.
You know, so I think if you can accelerate that, then yes, absolutely, it's a good thing to do, because it provides certainty for the new organisation. I think it's also then about managing the transition from the old. If people from old organisations are moving into new, in my experience, that becomes the focus of activity, which is as it should be, but also then it can leave a bit of a void in the old as you're still trying to transition to day one, if I'm articulating that properly. So it's just about being a little bit mindful around some of that, I think, and how those critical decisions you might need to bring forward a bit to make sure you can get them made properly whilst there's somebody to make them. I think was where I came from with that.
Thank you.
Okay. I think, I mean, obviously when we're asking these questions, I think there's going to be some jumping around in terms of there's some stuff that's common across all of them. I don't know if there's anything you wanted to add from a starting position, Rebecca, that hasn't already been covered.
So I was just trying to think back to the discovery work that we did. Absolutely echoes everything that's been said around kind of understanding your current technology and working out what needs to be integrated and what doesn't, and then thinking about your people and skills. And then reviewing those sort of existing investments that you've got, you know, decisions that have already been made about investment and kind of what's needed for going forward. But I think possibly just one thing that has been largely sort of spoken about is the officers that we spoke to absolutely emphasised the kind of importance of documenting that and then sharing it. You know, they thought it was not particularly helpful if you were doing all that work and it was great and it was in your team, but it was not shared across the organisation. You know, that did not help for planning. That did not kind of help kind of build that narrative. So I think doing those processes, you know, there are lots of activities you can do to sort of help establish that baseline, and kind of knowing where you stand and where you would like things to kind of improve, but making sure that, you know, you are doing that kind of knowledge sharing at a sort of early stage. I think that's the only other thing I would say that was helpful from the kind of would have been helpful in terms of the officers that we spoke to.
Great, thanks, Rebecca. Richard.
Yes, just one comment and a question, please. So I remember from past experience that I think the question earlier was about retaining some of your senior leaders and some of that knowledge. I think one of the things that was done both in Dorset and in Somerset was some of the people were kept on post-vesting day, even though they weren't part of the new structure, you know, for part of managing that transition process. I think that's probably something to consider going forwards. My question is really to sort of James and Andy. I remember that there was a whole host of legacy systems that were coming together, you know, different payroll systems, different revs and bends and all the rest of it. So 6 years on for James and obviously a couple of years on for Andy. Are we in a situation now where those things are sorted? Are you still running legacy systems now?
Shall I go first, Andy? So I mean, because as we had
I'll stop laughing. Yeah,
we've had the longest period. In the main, yes, you know, certainly the primary solutions have been converged, and that probably took us something in the region of 2 to 3 years to get to that position. So there might still be the odd outlier, which is down in the weeds, but the vast majority of that has been done, and that was focused on quite quickly because, you know, you were looking to where you had licensing flexibilities, you could move people onto one system and then slowly decommission the other things, or it was, you know, there was some interim steps for things. So, you know, things like planning, we converged onto one of the incumbent solutions on-prem, and then we transitioned to a new SaaS version of that. So primarily, yeah, we are fully converged. Our journey was probably uniquely different to other colleagues' journeys in that, you know, COVID hit not long after we unitarized, and so lots of focus obviously on COVID response, and actually that left us a lot of flexibility and freedom to focus on what we were doing because there wasn't a lot of other change happening in the organization. So we did have a bit of space in that period to be able to get on with doing some of the convergence work.
Thanks, James. Before I come to Sean, Andy, do you have anything from a Somerset perspective?
Yeah, we haven't converged yet. I mean, the 5-6 year time frame that James is talking at is probably what we're aiming for, but it is not possible to kind of do that within a year or 2 years. We landed a single finance system on vesting day, and that moved all of the systems from a mixture of SAP and others into Dynamics. We converged our income management. We've done some of the smaller systems. We are in the process of converging revs and bends as we speak, so that's happening at the background. It is difficult, and one of the biggest learnings was that even if someone is using the same system, they may not be able to converge into one. One of our systems, it's the same supplier in all 4 districts. 2 of them are in the cloud, 2 of them are on premise, 2 of them on the new version, 2 of them are on the old version, and there is no way to converge any of those. And the best we could do was maybe take some licenses off a combined price for all those 4 systems to keep going. And that is a big challenge, in that people tend to think that all districts work the same way, or all finance systems work the same way, and it's not possible. And and also, when you factor in, you've then got to procure a new system, and you've got to go through that process, and you've got the new regulations that have come in that kind of make that in a stricter way more difficult. So there's a lot of moving parts in converging a system, and there's a big risk. You are breaking a critical system, and with any kind of merge of a system, you're not going to avoid breaking something. So something will go wrong over the next few weeks with our revs and bends that we haven't thought about or is new, but that's just part of it. And if you do that across the whole of the organisation, you can't break every system at once, because you wouldn't be able to support it.
No, I think Cumberland's experience is very similar to Somerset's. We haven't aggregated all our systems yet, and in our case, we're focusing very much on disaggregation of solutions from the county council as well. So our focus has been on the big things like adults and children's social care solutions, which we've had to split into the 2 new instances. And from a children's social care perspective, for example, that programme of work to create 2 new children's social care solutions for Cumberland and Westmont took 2 years. We've only just gone live with those new systems in April this year. So that's where the focus of activity has been, as well as sort of aggregation of other solutions. So we're still very much the same. In fact, we're probably a little bit behind Somerset in some of those, in terms we haven't brought some of those together, because we've still been trying to split some of the other stuff to be able to then pull all the bits together. So we're seeing that as very much a longer term journey too. Sean. Can't hear you, Sean.
You know?
Yeah, got you now.
Yeah. Sorry. I've got a brand new laptop yesterday. I'm still working it out. I apologise. Sorry. It's a follow-on question from about dealing with the suppliers in those scenarios, because we're obviously looking at next 2 years, perhaps going in, and we're already having a lack of negotiating power with suppliers already. Post vesting day, I'm worried about how the likes of Civica and IDOX and all those other suppliers are, they've got you over a barrel a little bit. Is there anything you can help with that negotiation, or try and limit what they can charge you going forward?
It's a short answer. It's no.
No.
I suspected that, but it was.
It's a problem. We found that a challenge here, because of the nature of what you're trying to do. It is also very time critical as well. Pre-day one, you've got a vesting day is vesting day. It's not like a program of work that you can slip for a couple of months, because vesting day is vesting day and it has to be done. And that does drive certain behaviours, and it means that you are quite beholden to some of your suppliers. And I think for me, one of the key learnings for me around both your starting position and the roadmap, which we'll come on to, is those relationships with suppliers and understanding some of that, where you think there might be room for manoeuvre and negotiation. And I think perhaps, given where we are now with so many authorities looking at going through LGR, and there'll be suppliers in common, I think it's, how do you start to join the dots across yourselves in terms of, are you dealing with a particular supplier, are you getting a particular answer, is there anything that you can do collectively to influence that discussion? I think is something that perhaps it would be good to explore even through the LGA, as Rebecca as well, through the support there. If people are dealing with the same supplier on the same issue, is there something that we can do collectively as a sector to have that conversation? But I don't know if any of the rest of you have experienced the same thing as we have. Andy, James?
I think it is difficult, and that you are sort of pushed towards not 1 year. You know, you may want to extend 1 year because your plan is to consolidate in year 2, but they always push you towards those 3-year contracts. So, and you can guarantee that your dates won't line up for your app consolidation. So that it is there's a cost associated with keeping stuff going that you don't need as you do that journey of bringing them all together. And again, you know, if we go back to our, you know, and that kind of whole understanding how many people it takes to do an app consolidation. Our Revs and Bends system consolidation has 100 people involved in it, not full time, but it touches 100 people, be that testers, be that people doing the configuration. Some of that is the third-party support from the supplier. Some of it's from the transformation team. Some of it's from my team. So it's a big undertaking, and you know that we're not. Even when you get everyone together, you don't have enough resource to do a lot of those at the same time. So again, it's resourcing and risk that will hit you, and they know that. And you know that's the challenge of how do you your sensible plan may cost you more because you have to, you know, extend the life of a contract, and also think about archiving. You've got a responsibility to get that data out and put it somewhere, and they will always offer you a read-only copy of their system at a lovely price. But I think part of that preparation that you can do is how I'm going to get that data out of those systems and put it into something that we can access that doesn't cost us 20, 30, 40, 50 grand a year to keep things going. And remember, you're bigger. You know, some of the licensing is based around the size of your organization. So, you know, some of the business cases around app consolidation and saving money, it's not about how many people are using it, it's the size of your organization. So you can, you know, level up is an old term, but you can level up your licensing and your costs based upon being a unitary rather than being 4 separate or 5 separate districts.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. James?
I think what's been described already is consistent with Dorset. I think a few things that struck me in that. One, we used public contract rules, Regulation 72, to extend contracts without competition, and we used that quite extensively for a number of years after vesting day in order to buy us time. So that plays to some of what Andy was just describing. Suppliers didn't understand the legal processes of reorganisation, so that the legal entities that they originally contracted with no longer exist, and the novation of contracts to a new legal entity and what the implications were of that. I think we had insufficient capacity within the organisation to have some of the I guess richer conversations with suppliers to try and influence direction, but the reality of how flexible are they weren't very flexible. And I think there was a bit of a sliding scale on that. The smaller suppliers who are much more reliant on your business, where you're a much more important client to them, much more flexible than, you know, the Capitals of this world that just had no flexibility around that. And so I think, you know, it was an uncomfortable journey, I think, in reality. And of course, the reality is, I guess, for the market, is that we're a contracting customer base. So whilst numbers of users within systems might be different, it challenges some of their licensing models to maintain commercial viability, doesn't it, over time, as fewer local authorities exist consuming their services. So it's a difficult time for the commercial market as well.
Thanks, James. Anna?
Yeah, morning, or well, nearly afternoon, morning at the moment. Just, I think, give a bit of insight in Hertfordshire. I think the leaders are forming what I think is quite a naive view that they would like however many new authorities will be in structure in future, and that will either be 2, 3 or 4 at the moment. They would like those new authorities to start from scratch, new systems, blank sheet. You know, that's the utopia, isn't it? In an ideal world, that would be the case. you know, reality is we know from a technology perspective that will be impossible to achieve. So I'm just keen to hear from people around the table, how did you go about managing expectations in terms of transformation and opportunities for efficiency and things, and alongside that managing the expectations around the cost and complexity of disaggregation and aggregation? I think I'm struggling a bit at the minute to get those points across and to be able to adequately influence opinions and you know, the shaping of that work over the next couple of years. So yeah, interested in how people tackled that, really. Thank you.
Thanks, Anna. I mean, I think from my perspective, that's an ongoing discussion. So I spent a long time over the last couple of years trying to do a lot of that management of expectation that was set pre-day one, and actually once we're into day two onwards, has proven to be some, you know, assumptions about how much things would cost. You know, we're two new authorities, so we'll split the cost of these big contracts in two. So we'll pay half each when actually we'll pay more than double each instead. You know, that kind of thing, which has come back around the rolling of contracts forwards for 2 years, you know, because 2 years will give us plenty of time to do stuff. Well, 2 years is up and now we're back in the same place where we've got everything running out at the same time. And how much is this going to cost us to deliver, not just from a contracting perspective, but also from a resourcing perspective, because we're doing programs of work that you wouldn't necessarily run concurrently. I'm not sure any of us would run a new HR system, a new finance system, tenancy migration, Windows 11 upgrade, new networking, all at the same time. I think we would do that sequentially with teams of people programmed in, but because of the nature of where you come from through LGR, you've got this raft of stuff that you have to deliver. So I think that's an ongoing discussion, Anna, and I'm not sure we necessarily had that conversation sufficiently pre-day one with some of our leaders in terms of just the complexity of the ICT landscape and what it would take day two onwards to look at to address that, and how you pull data centers together or networks together, and what that actually means in real technical, you know, if one of you's got a massive data center and the other one doesn't, but what you're going to, are you going to be cloud hosted? But that changes your cost model if you're a capital rich organisation. So I think some of those level of discussion, which, you know, not a lot of people want to talk about Microsoft tenancies. I've spent a huge amount of my time over the last 2 years trying to explain Microsoft tenancies to our end users because it's impacting their daily existence. But I'm not sure we had that level of discussion pre-day one that would really help to manage those expectations. So that I'm probably not giving you an answer because I don't think we've got one yet, apart from you really need to focus on it. So anything you can do to try and have those conversations and influence it can only be of benefit longer term. So it's worth the hard work to try and get into those conversations now, I would, in my experience. Andy, James, I don't know if you've got anything that you went through on some of this.
Yeah, I think it is a difficult journey, and it does take a lot of explaining. And you know, we did go through. You know, I've shared some slides we did at the time around what are we going to call ourselves. That's the first big question. What, you know, we were lucky. We had somerset.gov.uk. That's fairly. It's not very bland. There isn't any politics around that. You know, those of you that are splitting into different, you've got to find a name that's acceptable to everyone, and then you've got to purchase it or you know, link it up to Microsoft, and then you've got to move everything there, and that's a big journey. And we did have to take people through why are we doing that. This is your new email address, because we had every combination of surname, forename, first letter, initials, everything that were in there that we had to make a decision on. You have to call, what do you call your SharePoint area? Are you gonna roll everything into a new one? Are you going to use something as a starting point? So there's some big technical decisions that you have to explain in a very non-technical way, and how is that going to impact you on vesting day or the lead up to vesting day? Because if you're combining tenants and you're moving emails and data and SharePoint and Teams, that doesn't happen the day before vesting day. We had that in 4 different tranches, you know, over 10 months. So there is a big journey to take people on, and after the first one, you're then into having the haves and have-nots. So the people that have moved into the new tenant can talk to each other, can see each other. whereas the people that haven't, they're still external, so they're almost like a third party, and you have to treat them differently, and you have to invite them to meetings differently, and they can't see things. So and people don't get that. So it is a very difficult message to get across, even just getting into a single at whatever.gov.uk email address for everyone.
Thanks, Andy. James.
I think that Dorset's experience, I think, plays back to the discussion we had about shadow authority before, and you know, depth of decision making around this stuff. So leading up to vesting day, there was this determination that it would be a new council, and all vestiges of former councils are expunged, and we are Dorset Council. Once we got over the line, so our timeline for appointments was, you know, shadow exec, chief exec appointed at January time, I think it was, something along those lines. The net, you know, exec directors appointed in the lead up to vesting day, and then so senior functional leadership not appointed until the late summer. So I was appointed in August, and only after that were people feeling like a single organisation, and then pragmatism comes into effect. So all of the don't understand all the complexities of that convergence and transition and impact. Suddenly, because people are concerned about that, suddenly when we're now Dorset Council and we have authority structures in place around that, and so the county council in Dorset being 80% of the new authority, instead of moving them all to a new tenancy, we moved everybody to the county council tenancy, and then hid as best we can any indication that it's the county council. So nobody sees that unless you're really in the depths of the Microsoft tenancy, and that's primarily just the IT people that ever see anything that says Dorset County Council, but that's fundamentally still there. So there's some real pragmatism, and then what's really important: line of least resistance, lowest cost, lowest disruption to operational services. So I think that ties back to getting depth into your shadow authority beforehand to allow you to start to make some of those decisions about how that future plays out for the best for the new authority, rather than still trying to broker the tensions between the former authorities.
Okay. So if we go on to talk, I know we've already talked about this a little bit around safe and legal. So in terms of some of the key considerations to get to safe and legal for day one, what would we all suggest as a panel that people need to think about day one? Andy, come to you first. Now we've just talked about some of the Microsoft tenancy stuff, for example.
Yeah, I think as an organisation, everyone gets safe and legal. Everything has to run as if it was the day before. But from a ICT perspective, safe and legal can kind of push some of those difficult decisions further down the line. So, and your safe and legal decision might not last beyond lunchtime on day two of the new authority, where people are saying this needs to change, this isn't working. So I definitely think what we went to as our kind of safe and legal go-to was that everyone will have the same email address, everyone will have their data in some form of SharePoint drive, and they might have some legacy that we need to transfer over if we don't get to that in time. We will have a single network, so you will be able to log on to in the different buildings you have all over the county or over your region with the same log on, so there won't be those difficulties. And that is a big challenge. That's probably an awful lot you're going to be doing in your lead up to vesting day if you try that. And obviously we were getting all our finances into a single system, and whether that's a new system or whether you're going to move into the other one, there is an awful lot of moving parts. There's an awful lot of data. There's an awful lot of old purchase orders that people want to cling on to that you're going to load up into your system and never use again. So there is some real big decisions to be made in that lead up to trying to get in that under the guise of safe and legal. What are you actually going to do? And is it going to cause you a problem going forward? Or is it that sensible path because you don't have time to do it? Because remember, the time between getting a decision on what does your unitary look like? Is it 1, 2, 3, or 4, whatever the options are, and vesting day sometimes gets delayed, and sometimes they can have a decision and then there can be a challenge. I remember there was even our decision was in July, and even after that, there was a couple of months of where we couldn't talk to each other because politically they hadn't sorted out how we were going to engage with each other. From an IT perspective, that was 2 months less of understanding what is the environment we've got to stick together and get working for day one. So there is, I think, safe and legal is great for an organisation, but you need to understand, is it just going to cause me a problem in day two? And you've got a burning platform in that the vesting day is a drop dead day that you can use to try and push some of those decisions forward, because it's definitely more difficult afterwards to do that next step. It does take longer because you haven't got that kind of key deadline of we've got to do it by then.
Thanks, Andy. James.
Echo all of that. I think the other dimension for us, which was a kind of post-vesting day dimension around safe and legal, was the cybersecurity context. So suddenly, exactly as Andy's described, we've federated all of our platform infrastructure, and suddenly over a much larger estate with lots of duplicate applications and all of those sorts of things. We saw lots, in the euphemistically post-discovery reality of what you find and pick up solutions we were becoming aware of, which were in effect all unsupported platforms. And so suddenly your cybersecurity context is down to the lowest common denominator over a much bigger footprint. You need to attend to that to tighten that up quickly. That's, I guess, even more important today than it was seven years ago. That's the other aspect, I think, that you need to attend to.
Yeah, thanks, James. And I can echo that absolutely. We're in an area where one of our district councils had a successful cyber attack in 2017 and had still been suffering from the legacy of that when we were getting towards vesting day. So that's cyber security. Like, don't underestimate just what you need to do to get that in place. I got to the point where I was sick and tired, and we talked about this the other day. The word safe and legal became one of those things that I could have frankly strangled the next person that said it to me, because you get so fed up of hearing safe and legal. It's not to say it's not important, it clearly is, but it can become a bit of a way of blocking anything happening, because it's got to be safe and legal, and I think it's just being really mindful that can become a bit of a barrier to getting stuff done, and just to be aware of that, I think is something that is one of the things that we learned here. Jo.
So I work for Guildford and Waverley councils, so two separate councils that have been collaborating for a number of years. I'm listening to everybody talking. Everybody's talking about the timeliness of everything and how it's tight. Well, we find out in October where there were 2 or 3 authorities, and literally 15 months later we have vesting day, and that is one challenge. It's a real challenge, and we're working really hard to make sure that we've got the right information. We're also looking at where we can almost ramp up the collaboration between the two authorities. So what can the panel advise us that I need to do in addition to this? Because I've just noticed that I think it was Tony said you had 12 months. We have got a little bit of expertise on our side in Richard, and who is on the call. He's not got his camera on, but he is listening in, that can guide us and support us and advise us. But what would the panel advise that I need to do over and above what I would have done if I'd had more time?
Silence. Rebecca, have you got?
Yeah, I'm happy to come in with a couple of things. So the sort of starting point when we were thinking about this at the LGA in terms of sort of the kind of day one, I guess, is kind of, why is it so important to get that technical transition right? Well, it's basically because you don't want to fail your citizens, and you don't want to end up on the front page of the local newspaper for doing something horrible. So I think kind of keeping that kind of crystal clear. So I think we've talked about some of the kind of initial stages. And then I guess maybe that second stage is thinking about what is your day one technical offer? you know, what does that look like? And there's some kind of essentials within that, your non-negotiables, the things that have been mentioned already. You know, you need your email, your website, your finance and HR and telephony, and you've got those foundational things ready to go. Crucially, you've got your security and your data governance as well. You know, everyone on this call probably knows when you start making changes to the processes within the digital landscape, you introduce new risks, and there will be a lot of, you know, information and data being shared around. So that bit's really critical. But I think it's a balance between kind of focusing on those essentials and balancing those immediate needs with your long-term vision as well. So yes, there'll be some immediate practicalities of day one. They're really critical, but don't let them overshadow what it is you want to do in the long term as well. So you will need that fast pace for day one, but because that's a real challenge. But you'll also need that strategic visioning as well for day two, and that needs to run in parallel. So I guess you've got the first milestone, but then you also need momentum as well for what comes next. So, you know, all the stuff that comes next around kind of managing what's going to expire, your system convergence, all that kind of long-term transition as well. So you probably really will need some experienced program management in place to start thinking about those kind of like complexities of those kind of ongoing tasks. I think that's what I'd say that kind of came out from what we'd heard back from, you know, people who've gone through this in the last kind of couple of years.
Thanks, Rebecca. Andy.
Yeah, I think don't be afraid by a 15-month time frame. You know, we consolidate our finance system. It started 12 months before vesting day, but in reality, we did it in 10 months, and then we kind of fixed forward afterwards. So we got to that safe and legal. We can pay people, we can buy stuff, and then we kind of took it a bit further for another 6 months, because those sort of projects are around 18 months. So 15 months is enough time to do a lot of these things. I think the key, as I said at the start, is drilling into what are your contracts, what have people got, what is on the roadmap for some of these products as well. You know, it's not just what you've got, it's what will come end of life and what will you need to fix probably at the wrong time. You know, Microsoft will always, you might have some dodgy servers from SQL Server from beyond the, you know, the year dot that is hidden away somewhere that you don't find about, and understand where your layers of duplication are, and is it something that you can consolidate or plan for? Because again, these projects, you know, can do these sort of things in 12 months. You might need a bit of procurement. That's the difficult as to who's buying it. But I think just doing that full audit of what have I got, what am I going to end up with, where's the duplication, what's easy to change and what's more difficult is really the starting point. I think we didn't do enough of that. And I think sometimes it's difficult to find out, because we all have things buried under the carpet, don't we? And you've got to have that confidence to tell people, yeah, we didn't do this very well. And you think if you take that people element, that's at a time where the person you're telling you've done something wrong might be going for your job. So, you know, you've got that kind of human element in there as well, and that protectionism of everyone wants to say, oh, I was the best head of IT in the whole of the however many people are in this new organisation. So I'm not going to tell you how I messed up 2 years ago by buying something wrong. So there is all that going on, and that's just part of this process that you have to deal with.
Thanks, Andy. James.
I think the other thing that we had no conversation about pre-vesting day and pre-assimilation of the workforce was what that future workforce would look like. So, you know, in addition to focusing on all those things we talked about right at the sort of top of the conversation that Andy's just touched on, yeah, I wouldn't, if I had my time again, maybe having some thought about what we think that new organisation might look like from a technology and data perspective might be helpful, because what we were presented with was a consultancy-led structure that was done down to a level behind closed doors, that was presented as a fait accompli, and which wasn't actually fit for purpose. And then subsequently you're trying to design a structure underneath that. So if you've got some ideas about what that new organisation needs to look like in order to carry the vision forward, once you get that vision, because of course it's difficult to get a vision before you get your new councillors appointed and you get that new strategic leadership in place. That's helpful to, I guess, to be able to start to influence some of that, because that's been very problematic, and that's the thing that's been the most lag. So Dorset is only now looking to address some of the legacy of that LGR process in terms of organisation.
Thanks, James. I think we've said a few times, you know, there's not, for my mind, there's not too much you can do now to understand your contract position and really get into this under the detail of all your contracts, because that will be an issue potentially if you don't really, as much as you possibly can. And it's very difficult rather to do a sort of amnesty of this stuff, because there's just going to be stuff that people don't want to tell you about for reasons that Andy's already explained. But the more you can find out, the more you understand your technology picture pre-day one, the better. And those boring things that come back to bite you, can people access buildings? And that's not boring, is it? People need to be able to get into a building to go to work. People need to be able to print. You need to be able to pay your staff and your suppliers. You need to know who your staff are. You know, those are the kinds of things that really need the focus. And that, yes, there'll be lots of other things that people want to do pre-day one, but actually, are they red lines for starting a new authority, or are they things that can wait to be programmed in later? But make sure that you have that discussion pragmatically. That is, we're not going to do it day one. We're going to have a programme of work day two onwards, because I think the closer you get, Joe, through that 15 months, the focus becomes so purely day one, understandably, that you kind of get to day two and then go, well, no, what do we, you know, where do we start now? And I think you've got to try where you can to have at least a rudimentary plan for what you might move on to do day two. But yeah, the things that have caused us noise pre-day one or post-day one I can't print in this building, I can only print in the building down the road because of the different networks that we're on. And, you know, how do we facilitate that kind of end user experience? Like, we've all got different kit, we've all got different laptops and different laptop builds and different mobile phones, and, you know, all of that kind of stuff that causes noise for you as an organisation is some of the things that came out for us.
Yeah, I think buildings, printers, we had a different printing contract for each legacy authority, so you couldn't print. I remember a wonderful day where I was walking around one of our ex-head offices trying to work out which is the door to get in, because I didn't have the right card, and it was a receptionless office, so you couldn't get to FM to get the right card. That was an interesting day.
And keeping your staff happy, or really keeping the staff happy, or, you know, being able to print, being able to log on, you know, if you
or get in the door.
Or get in the door. I started to, like, there's things that, you know, I hadn't really considered, in that actually you need to protect your staff. You need to make sure that things that they need work for them, so they can then take you forward to day two and day three and day four. Okay,
yeah,
I'm planning on a holiday then. I really am.
No, but I think it's, you know, it's bitter experience, and if we can share that and you can sort of take measures to address some of this, and it is, you know, that organisational noise of staff that can't see each other's calendars. In our case, you know, we've still got 7 different Microsoft tenancies, and people can't see each other's calendars, and they can't access the SharePoints, and they can't share through the OneDrives, and, you know, it causes a lot of noise. And when you're in an environment where you've got so many programs of work to deliver, it's noise that you could do with minimising where you can. And if that message is, we're really sorry, you're not going to be able to see each other's calendars for another 2 years, you need to be open and transparent with that, as hard as that message is, because at least you're managing expectations. And I think sometimes you want to present as, obviously we all do, because we're in that context where we haven't got jobs, or we're not sure who our managers are going to be, or all the rest of it. It's a really can be a really vulnerable place to be, to say you're not going to be able to see each other's calendars for a little while yet. So I think but understanding that and being able to be prepared for that, I think it's half the battle, because we hit things that we just hadn't considered, because you get swamped into this kind of, you just got to move on to get to somewhere. And, you know, printing was one of the things that we probably didn't consider the way that we needed to, and, you know, that's caused us some noise. And I wish we had considered it, because it would have been something we could have not easily addressed, but done something about.
And I think, you know, practically, you are moving from a smaller organisation to a much bigger organisation, and those go-to people that you went to, and not just in ICT, but just in other departments, that network of people maybe aren't there anymore. Maybe they've moved, maybe they've left, maybe they've, you know, got another job. or you don't know how to connect to them because they're sitting in a different tenant or something. There's also there's that whole kind of people change and that kind of human element of like starting a new job. It's like when you start a new job, you don't have your network around you. You've got to start again, and that perhaps isn't communicated well in the process. People kind of think it's still, everyone's still going to be there. I can still put my hands around all those people I used to be able to put my hands around and know what to do, and you can't.
And going back to what somebody said earlier on, is about setting expectations and making, being absolutely honest with your staff and saying, this is what's concerning, is this what I'm going to try and do to make sure that you're fine. I feel responsible for my staff.
Yeah, and I think as a leader we all do, and I think it can be really hard work, and I think you've got to, as a leader, give yourself that, not beat yourself up about it, because you're not going to take control of some of this and answer all the questions, but that I think is being open to that. I think it's going to sound a bit, I don't know what the word is, but organisational identity has had a big part to play here. People's identity. We're in a county or a part of the country where people don't tend to move around a lot. So we get people that had worked at the county council for 30 years, and it was part of their identity. And we probably, I think, maybe underestimated just the sense of organisational belonging that goes along with your performer sovereign authority. I was a member of the county council, and being moved into this new thing is actually quite a challenge for my personal identity, because my work life has been so dominated by the way in which the county council did stuff, that can be something that I think is worth being mindful of as well. So just conscious of time, I know we've talked around this a lot, but I think we'll move to this question because I find it quite interesting. What's the one thing you wish you'd known before you started LGR? James, I think I'll come to you first.
I mean, there was more things that I wished had been understood for me, and I've kind of already touched on those. So for fear of repeating myself, the key thing, I guess, was anticipating that pragmatism about what that future context looks like. And I think if that lack of decisive leadership and having space to have a conversation about vision, there was never a conversation about what the technology future looks like beyond the very narrow perspectives of safe and legal, and so it was very difficult to then engage with what that future needs to look like. So that it's also difficult to think about what that new structure needs to be able to support that you then need to start to design and develop. So those were particularly it. More vision, having that leadership in place, and more pragmatism.
Andy.
I did know this, but I didn't understand the significance of it at the time. So I spoke to, before going into the intro, I spoke to Tony Ellis, who'd done it in Bucks. Sadly passed away last year, but he explained that you need to have a very collaborative governance environment where you can get groups of people, and that's not just at my level, it's at that kind of technology level, where they can have those, where they feel like they've been engaged with, they feel like they've been heard, and they feel like those decisions are something they can align to. They maybe not agree with them, but they understand the reasons why. And as things progressed, that became more and more important, because people are getting closer to, well, this is the environment I really am going to be working in. I'm leaving my legacy council behind, and this is what I'm going to go to. And at the start, we didn't do enough of that, and I didn't do enough of that. And some of that is around that kind of trying to work out where you sit in the shadow authority, because you don't really have any authority, because you've got control over your legacy authority, but you don't. No one's empowered to make a decision. There isn't an ICT director to make that decision. So you really do have to work at explaining why you want to do that, or why you're doing it, because it's cheaper or it's the most sensible solution. So I think that's my biggest learning, was start that collaboration, whether difficult that might be early on.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that, Andy. And I think that's one of my biggest takeaways from the experience is we often focus on the differences between us all as organisations coming together rather than focusing on the commonalities. And I don't think we spent enough time having those discussions and getting to know each other as individuals in that, and our motivations behind the way in which we were approaching stuff. I remember having a particularly challenging conversation with a colleague from another authority around a specific piece of technology that we both just came at from completely diametrically opposed perspectives, and we just couldn't come to a consensus on what we were going to do, and it was ridiculous. But we're in this environment, when you look back, where we were both feeling really challenged about where we were going to end up, but actually taking the time to speak to this individual as and actually understand motivations. Well, we're both coming at it from the same place. Actually, we both just wanted to do the right thing for our residents. We're just coming at it from a totally different perspective. And actually, I know that sounds really simple and straightforward, but it does tend to be the bit that gets a little bit missed when you're trying to do all these programs of work at the same time. So for me, it was very much my biggest learning is spend as much time as you can, even if they're really difficult, challenging conversations, to really get to a common place with colleagues from other authorities. And it might be that you never do that, but at least you've tried to come to that position and understand where there are things that are in common, and you can start to build on those, as opposed to always finding the things that are different between you. I think was where I came from, and the fact that people will leave and that you might want to leave yourself, and that can be really destabilizing. So just be prepared for a bit of emotional resilience, I think, is a bit of a takeaway. This is a long program of work. It can be a long program of work, and you've got to be a bit kind to yourself, I think, was one of my biggest areas of learning.
Yeah, and kind to each other. And the other thing is, you'll probably be going through the recruitment process right near the end, which is just not the time where you want to be distracted by seeing whether your previous job description matches 75% of the new ones, so you're a slot in, or whether you have to apply. So I remember that January, February time was probably the toughest time, whereas I really didn't want to be there. You're talking about 3 interviews, one with your staff, one with members, and one with interested parties along with other directors. So you've got to prepare for that whilst trying to get a single finance system up and running, just finishing off loading purchase orders or something. So it is, personally, it's a difficult journey, and probably right at the end it becomes the most difficult.
Thanks, Andy.
I won't put anyone off though.
No. Yes. I mean, it can be quite, when you're talking about it, there are some really challenging periods through this process, but fundamentally and this is another phrase that I actually came to hate, but it's true. It is an opportunity to really look at the way in which you deliver services in your local areas and try and transform the way that happens. You've got to be pragmatic and realistic about the timescales for doing that, I think. But there is loads of opportunity here. It can be quite difficult to stay focused on the opportunity when you're going through some of these periods of time, but I think that's what drives most of us that work in the sector, isn't it? It's about improving outcomes for residents, and I think there are huge opportunities to do that. We've just got to be realistic about how we can deliver it. Rebecca, I'm not sure if there's anything that came through any of the interviews around any of this.
The only other one that's not been mentioned, which is it's hard to do this, but having a better awareness and being prepared for unexpected costs, I think. So costs of licensing changes, splitting systems, maybe having to hire in consultants, kind of not really knowing kind of what you're working with and what kind of how big some of those sort of changes could be, and being prepared for that. But like I say, I mean now I guess councils now may be in a better position from events like this, and being able to talk to people about those things, that you could try to anticipate some of those. But that's probably the only other thing that came out, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that I've talked to colleagues about who've been through this in other areas, at the time that we went through, Andy, I mean, no, James, you were ahead of us. We didn't have events like this. There wasn't this level of support. And I know there was pockets of it and we were able to reach out, but there wasn't the kind of all of the peer groups and the groups that the LGA is spinning up, and there wasn't this kind of thing that was available to us. So part of me is quite jealous that there's opportunity for people to hear from people that have been through it, and to develop those peer networking groups. So I would just say, use them as much as you can, and those of us that have been through it, use us too, because speaking for myself, I'm more than happy to speak to anybody about specific examples or things that you want to discuss, because I think that can only benefit us as a sector more broadly moving forward. So like, I think it's not a lesson that I've learned, but it's a lesson I would like really take advantage of these kinds of sessions and groups that are there, because I wish to God we'd had some of this at the time, even if it's just to share the pain occasionally, and just to get a bit of someone just to tell you you're not going entirely insane, that you are legitimately, I think that's worthwhile in and of itself.
Yeah, and there is new technology to help you with some of this stuff. If I'd have had an AI that could look through a SharePoint folder looking for contract end dates and what the CPI, RPI was and all of them, I'd be in a much better place on day one. So, use the technology to help you. It does that stuff really, really easily. Whereas you might be talking to 4 different people in procurement or whatever, trying to find that information, which will take a lot longer. So there are things you can speed up just to give you that view of what will I end up with if I'm lucky enough to take control of this department at the end of it. And it might mean you don't apply for that job when you see how bad it is.
Andy. Conscious that we've only got 10 minutes left. Has anyone got any questions that we haven't addressed or anything they want to raise? Tamsin.
Hi, yeah, I just wanted to know if you've got any advice in terms of communication to staff, because that feels to me like one of the biggest things we need to tackle, and whether you, through your experiences, you worked out better ways of doing it, and sort of frequency. And yeah, any learnings around that would be helpful.
Thanks, Tamsin. I think this is one of the things that I've been focusing on quite a lot in recent months because of the nature of where we are. We haven't done enough of it from an ICT digital perspective, communicating to our internal staff users. We haven't done enough of it in terms of it's really difficult to explain a tenancy migration program to a group of, and it sounds like a sweeping generalisation, I don't mean it to, but just describing that to a group of care workers who are actually really not interested in the intricacies of tenancy, just want to know how they're going to be able to log on and do things properly. We haven't done enough of that. I think we've shied away a little bit too much from communicating out to people just where we are as a service, what some of the things we've got to deliver, because some of that is the stuff that people would never need to know about when they're switching the machines on. I really don't want to have to spend time talking about network switches and that have to be replaced and data centers that that have to be upgraded and all of that, but I think we should have done more of that. So I think the more that you can do, the better, but not overdo it.
Yeah, and I think that is part of the difficulty in that kind of lead up to vesting day, is that you will have ex comms teams with different approaches to dealing with the different parts, and they might have different rules about what you can tell people, because they still are a sovereign authority, so you do not have control over that. And there will be a LGR, whatever it is, comms team as well, linking all that up. So you do have to go through that, and some of these things can be political, especially if there's an election in the middle of what you're doing. So, there's all of that playing into that comms narrative of, yes, you do need to keep people up to date, but sometimes your helpful message about not being able to do something can come into your local paper and be turned into some kind of saga that you just wanted to tell people that they wouldn't have their email address over the weekend or something, and it turns into something way worse.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. James?
I think the other thing, I guess, from my perspective is, where does the communication that we're trying to make to the organisation fit amongst all the rest of the communications about the process? And individuals can only absorb so much, and so there's some real tensions, I think, there in terms of making the central programme understand the importance of some of these things for ways of working for individuals, that they get put into broader communications around the programme at a level of depth that becomes meaningful. Beyond vesting day for us, I think we were in a unique situation that none of you will face, I think, hopefully, which was we were in COVID. So 3-4 months after our structures were assimilated, we go into emergency response mode as an organisation, and the communication was all about that context. And so actually Dorset, we got on with a lot of that, the platform convergence, the tenancy work, kind of quietly in the background because we could get on and do that stuff whilst people were impacted by in their ability to work by COVID. So it's a very unique circumstance for that kind of immediate 18-month period following vesting day.
Thanks, Jane. Rebecca, was there any themes on comms that came through any of the work that's been done?
I'm trying to think. I mean, I can put a link into the report that we did. Essentially, what we tried to do was find some way of kind of visualizing so you can kind of follow the process, so you kind of understand kind of what the different things happening at different, just to give you a sense of kind of what the journey looks like. So maybe that would be a good place to just, you know, it might be a good template for kind of visualizing kind of what's happening when in a kind of phased approach. I mean, it's not, you know, not the only thing to do, but maybe that could actually help with that kind of understanding what the journey essentially.
Thanks, Rebecca. Alex.
Yeah, I'm just trying to I'm trying to put my mind into the position of change colleagues from within Civitek. I think just to follow up on Rebecca's point, everybody goes through the change curve at different paces. So I think having a variety of different interventions that you can use at different points in time within your plan would be a really useful thing to do, Tamsin. So some of it might be email communications, some of it might be drop-in sessions that actually shows people how the new login is going to look and feel for them at an appropriate time. So I think that's something to think about, the types of interventions you're going to have at the different points in that change journey, and doing it at a program level rather than necessarily just doing it at a technology workstream level.
Thanks, Alex. Well, I think we're just about at time. So thank you everyone for coming, and thanks Alex, Elaine for organising. I hope you found it a useful session. I know there's some resources being put in the chat. We'll put our contact details in there as well so that people can access them, or we can distribute them later. So yeah, just thanks everybody. Thanks to the panel for joining us and for sharing your knowledge and so openly and transparently. I hope we haven't scared you all totally to death and that it doesn't put you off and you'll run away and get new jobs, because it genuinely can be a really rewarding experience too. But just, yeah, reach out, I think, is my biggest takeaway from this session. Reach out and learn and take these sources of support where they're being offered, because people really want to help those of you that are coming after us to kind of not make some of the same mistakes, or at least be able to manage some of the risks that exist around this process. So yeah, just massive thanks for joining. Rebecca.
I was sorry, I know you're wrapping up. I was just going to throw one more thing because I didn't get a chance to say it before, but I know that Microsoft was mentioned a couple of times. So we are having regular meetings with Microsoft, essentially trying to feedback what we're hearing as the kind of primary tier one supplier. So I know that they do. I know there's colleagues from Surrey councils here, so I know that they are interestingly using Surrey as a sort of test site. So we're going to be supporting an event with Microsoft, Surrey and the Essex partnership to try to share some of that learning. And we've also got a sort of supplier briefing with Tech UK coming up next month, just to try to kind of help that supplier readiness as well, which is something that we didn't kind of get onto. So if you've got any kind of queries, questions, concerns in that space, you know, do absolutely reach out and let us know. We can kind of fold that into those ongoing conversations that we're having already.